Good day and welcome to Lesson 5 in our study of the book of Jonah. Today we're starting chapter 3 and only the first two verses. And it says in the first verse, "Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time." This is very similar to what it said in chapter 1, where it said, "Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah." So what is happening is that this thing is starting to repeat itself again. The word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time. He didn't get it the first time, because when the word of the Lord came to Jonah the first time, Jonah took off in the direction opposite to what God had asked him to go. Instead of going where he was supposed to go, he went to Tarshish, or tried to go there on a boat. And we can see from the first two chapters what happened to him because he disobeyed and tried to distance himself from God. So he said that now he's back on dry land. The fish got tired of him and threw him up on the dry land. And the Lord said again, the same thing he said at the very start of this, the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time. "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and preach to it the message that I tell you." The first time he said, go to the city, that great city, and cry out against it. Cry out against it. Point out its shortcomings. Point out what it has been doing wrong in my sight. Now he says, preach to it the message that I will give you. Notice he didn't tell Jonah what Jonah was supposed to preach. But this was something that was going to come later. He just told Jonah to go to the city of Nineveh and preach to it the message that he was going to give him. Now this is essentially what he said 2 chapters ago at the very start of the story. But Jonah rebelled and didn't go where he was supposed to go and went through all this ordeal of the storm, the shipwreck, being thrown overboard, being rescued by the great fish, being thrown up eventually on the shore after the fish got tired of him in his stomach. He was just in a turmoil because he didn't do what God asked him to do the first time. So God is very quietly saying to him, now go and do what I asked you to do in the first place. The point of this is, the point of these two verses is to show that God is not someone who gives up on us easily. God could very easily have said, Jonah, you failed me. I'm done with you. The fish can have you. The sea can have you. The sailors can have you. Whatever. But he didn't say that. He said, Jonah, I've shown you what you've done wrong. Now we're back to where we started. Go to Nineveh and preach the message that I am going to give you. God gave him a second chance. And this is the point of this. God gives a lot of us second chances. We don't do what we're supposed to do in the first place. Sometimes it's very subtle. Sometimes it's more obvious. But how much trials and troubles and turmoils and distress do we put ourselves through? Do we get ourselves into because we don't do what God tells us to do in the first place? How many people get into problems with themselves or with addictions or with the law or whatever because they do things they know are against what God is telling them to do and going against what they know they should be doing? But God still gives us all second chances. He still gives us a time again to go and do what he asked us to do in the first place. There'd be so many fewer problems in this world, individually and collectively, if we only did what God wanted us to do in the first place, rather than having him ask us to do it a second time. So what this is about, these first two verses, is to show that Jonah was given by God a chance to do a second time what he was asked to do the first time. The word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, to arise and go to Nineveh, that great city. Now preach to them what I will teach you or tell you to preach. Jonah did not want to go to Nineveh because he disliked the Assyrians so much. He was a mortal enemy of the Assyrians. He did not want them to be saved by God. He did not want them to be helped by God. He wanted them to perish. He did not want God to be on their side at all. Besides, the Assyrians were Gentiles. They weren't Jews. What was God doing? Trying to assist the Assyrians. So Jonah had all these things in his mind, and therefore he rejected. But God wanted him to do something. He rejected it, went through all this turmoil, stress, trouble, because he rejected God's command in the first place. And now he's right back, essentially where he started. Worse for the wear, admittedly, but back where he started. And God is saying very quietly to him, Jonah, arise and go to Nineveh and preach to them the word that I want you to preach. That's not playing games. Just do what you're asked to do. If he had done that in the first place, he would have avoided so much. But of course, we would not have the story to talk about either. But the point is that God gave him a second chance. God is a God who gives people second chances. He gives us second chances. He gives us the ability and the time when we do reject him to come back to him a second time, even a third time, and a fourth time at times. The point is that he gave Jonah the chance to do it again, even though Jonah had failed him in the first place. And that's really the whole essence of these two verses. The word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time to arise and go to Nineveh and preach to them the message that I tell you. And that is all we're going to do today. Just keep in mind the second chance that God gave to Jonah. But the problems that Jonah went through because he didn't listen in the first place. That's really the essence of these two verses. So I'm going to get on to a little further in this chapter next week. But thanks for watching for now. Try to take into account what these two verses tell us. And I'll see you next week for further on in chapter 3. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.